Hey there! Ready for a wild ride? Today we're diving into the world of Bonnie and Clyde.
But not the Hollywood version. We're going deep, folks.
Yeah.
FBI files, personal letters, even some of Bonnie's poetry.
It's crazy how a story from the 1930s still gets people talking.
It's like their story became part of America's DNA.
But to really get them, we gotta rewind back to the Great Depression. Imagine America in the 1930s. Dust Bowl, bread lines, folks losing everything. What was it like back then?
It was brutal. Imagine you're an everyday American, you've lost your job, your savings, your house even. There's this feeling of hopelessness, like the whole system is rigged against you.
And then you see these guys, Bonnie and Clyde, hitting those banks. It's almost like they were giving a voice to that anger, that frustration.
There was this sense of, maybe not admiration exactly, but
Yeah.
understanding. They were outlaws, sure, but they were fighting back against a system that felt broken.
But their story, it's not so black and white, is it? I mean, their first meeting, it's not some Hollywood romance.
Yeah.
Right, like love at first sight. No, it's messier than that. Bonnie was actually already married.
Really?
Oh yeah, her husband was in prison, but still. And Clyde had his own run-ins with the law. Their relationship was more complicated, more about survival, wouldn't you say?
So where does the whole love story angle come from?
It's the power of myth-making, isn't it? People love a good love story, especially when it's set against a backdrop of crime and rebellion.
And those early crimes, they were pretty small time, right?
Uh,
Petty robberies, car thefts.
It seemed like they were just trying to get by, trying to survive in a world that had gone mad.
But then things take a darker turn, wouldn't you say? It's not just stealing cars anymore. We're talking about kidnappings, gunfights, even murders.
And that's where their story takes a turn, wouldn't you agree? They become more than just petty criminals, they become symbols.
Symbols of what?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Of rebellion, of desperation, maybe a little of both. But their actions, especially the violence against law enforcement, it painted a target on their backs.
And it set the stage for the legend of Bonnie and Clyde. And they weren't exactly keeping a low profile, were they? Their pictures were everywhere.
Oh, the newspapers ate it up. Front-page news practically every week.
But why them? What was it about Bonnie and Clyde that captured the public's imagination?
Well, you got to remember the times, right? People were hurting. They were angry. And here you had this young couple, good-looking, brazen as hell, sticking it to the banks, to the law, to the whole damn system.
They were like folk heroes.
In a way, yeah. And then there were those photos from that Joplin raid. Remember those?
How could I forget? Bonnie with that cigar, the gun in her hand. It's iconic.
It challenged everything people thought a woman should be. She wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Hell, she practically dared the world to judge her.
And Joplin, that was a turning point, wasn't it? 2 officers dead. Suddenly, they weren't just charming outlaws anymore.
Joplin changed everything. Public opinion started to shift. The body count was adding up.
But even with the heat on, they still managed to pull off that prison break and east him.
Can you imagine the audacity? It was like they were playing a different game entirely.
Talk about a slap in the face to law enforcement. What was Clyde thinking?
I think for him it was personal. He was sending a message they couldn't break him. Nobody could. And that's when they brought in Frank Hamer.
Texas Ranger, right? He was a legend.
Hamer was a different breed. He was relentless. He knew he couldn't outgun Clyde, so he decided to outsmart him.
And that's what led to the ambush at Gibbsland.
Hamer spent weeks studying Bonnie and Clyde's every move, every hideout, every contact. He knew their weaknesses, knew they couldn't resist helping family.
And he used that to set the trap.
May 23rd, 1934.
Oh.
They never saw it coming. Over 130 rounds fired.
A bloodbath. Just like that, it was over.
But here's the thing. Their story, it didn't end there, did it?
Yeah.
Their legend, it just exploded.
It's like they went from outlaws to icons overnight.
It's funny how death can do that, right?
Especially when you factor in the whole media frenzy surrounding them.
Oh, absolutely. Newspapers, magazines,
Yeah.
they couldn't get out.
And the movies, don't even get me started on the movies.
It's like their story became this blank canvas, right? Everyone projecting their own ideas onto it.
The romanticized version, the tragic love story, the Robin Hood narrative.
But truth, as always, is much more complicated.
And easy to lose sight of, especially with the passage of time.
It's like we forget there were real victims, real families torn apart by their actions.
That's a good point.
The glamour fades, and what you're left with is the human cost.
And that's something we can't afford to forget.
No, we can't. It's too easy to get swept up in the legend.
The Bonnie and Clyde we see on screen, in songs, in books.
It's a fantasy, a distorted reflection of the truth.
It makes you wonder, though, why are we still so drawn to their story after all these years?
Maybe it's the allure of rebellion. The idea of sticking it to the man, even if it's just a fantasy.
Or maybe it's something deeper. This need to find meaning in chaos, to make sense of a world that can often feel random and unfair.
Because even in their violence, in their recklessness,
It was a glimmer of something else.
a spark of defiance.
A yearning for something more.
And maybe, just maybe,
That's what continues to resonate with us all these years later.
makes you think, doesn't it?
It sure does. Well, folks, there you have it.
The legend, the myth, the reality of Bonnie and Clyde.
We dove into the archives, sifted through the headlines.
And hopefully offered you a new perspective on this enduring American tale.
And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive.
Digging deeper, uncovering the hidden layers.
And leaving you with more questions than answers.
Because sometimes the most fascinating stories are the ones that stay with you long after the credits roll.
Thanks for coming along for the ride.
Until next time.